Tonight on Politicat, Blackwater back channel Eric Prince joins the cast of the Russia scandal. A climate of change, President Trump rolls back Obama regulations. And welcome to the neighborhood, Montenegro joins NATO. All this and more on Politicat, your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Fallon Gallagher. Tonight we'll be joined by Calvin Anderson, president of NU College Democrats, and Dominic, event secretary of the College Republicans. But first, today's headlines. Last night it was reported that in January, Eric Prince, founder of the McCartney group Backwater, attended a secret meeting in the country of Seychelles with Associate Russian President Vladimir Putin in what was allegedly an attempt to establish a back channel between President Trump and the Kremlin. The story was confirmed by sources from the U.S., Europe, and United Arab Emirates. Prince is also the brother of Trump donor and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Judge Neil Gorsuch's confirmation vote will go to the Senate on Friday after the Senate Judiciary Committee voted along party lines on Monday to send Gorsuch's nomination forward. This vote sets up the long-awaited showdown between Republicans, who are pushing for Gorsuch's confirmation, and Democrats, who are preparing to filibuster him. Republicans have vowed to use the so-called nuclear option if the Democrats filibuster, which would rescind the rule requiring a full majority to confirm Supreme Court nominees. Rumors have been circulating around Capitol Hill that members of the Freedom Caucus are discussing a revival of the Republican health care plan after a meeting with Trump. Representative Justin Amash of Michigan took part in the meeting. He said, however, that no legislative text has been seen and that no deal has been reached. For more on the ongoing health care battle, you can check out Politicat's interactive timeline on nntv.org. And finally, tonight is Election Day in Evanston, and the city chooses a new mayor. Current Mayor Elizabeth Tisdall announced in July that she would not seek re-election after serving as the city's mayor for 2 four-year terms. A primary election was held in February, though no candidate received more than 50% of the vote, which means the top 2 candidates squared off today. Politicat's Andrew Merica is live at the polling station in Parks Hall on Northwestern's campus with more. Andrew?
Thanks, Fallon. Polls closed just a little over an hour ago, so we still don't have any results. But Evanstonians had their choice today between businessman Steve Haggerty and 6th Ward Alderman Mark Tindem for Evanston mayor. In February's primary, Haggerty came in first with 44.4% of the vote in a 5-person race. Tindem came in second with 20.5%. Haggerty, who was endorsed by Evanston Mayor Elizabeth Tisdall, ran on a platform of Evanston for All, hoping to facilitate business development in all corners of Evanston. Tindem, on the other hand, ran on a platform of experience, specifically citing his time as alderman. He, in fact, received endorsement from the Daily Northwest. As I said, they are still counting the votes, so we do not have a mayor quite yet, but we hope to by the end of the show. As soon as we have those results, we'll be back on the air with you guys. Fallon?
And Andrew, how was the voter turnout today?
So it's interesting, actually. In Parks Hall, there are 2 precincts, Precinct 6 and Precinct 1. Precinct 6, we actually have unofficial results for. If I can show you here, this is what the unofficial results look like. They had 20 voters, only 20 voters throughout the day. 13 voted for Mark Tindem, 6 for Steve Haggerty, and then 1 did not vote for Evanston mayor. Precinct 1, which is the other precinct here, is still tallying the votes. They apparently had a little over 100 voters. So hopefully, as they're done, we will have those unofficial results too. And hopefully, by the end of the show, we'll know who the next mayor is. Fallon?
All right, Politicat's Andrew Merica reporting live from Parks Hall. Andrew, thanks. Democratic Representative Jim Hines said today that the House Intelligence Committee is, quote, getting back to business regarding its investigation into Russian meddling in the election. This comes after last week when Democratic lawmakers called a Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, to recuse himself from the investigation after it was reported Nunes received information from the top Trump White House aides. Now we turn to our panel to discuss where the U.S. stands with the Russian investigation. Calvin Anderson and Dominic Baer, welcome to the show. So where are we with this investigation? Close to an end, or as Donald Trump puts it, just another political witch hunt?
I think this is kind of a mix of both. I think, seriously, Russian meddling in the election is a big cause of concern. And we've seen the hacking of the DNC emails, trolls, and kind of Russian attempts to influence the results of our election and undermine trust in our electoral system. And we should be taking a serious look at this and trying to see kind of what we can do in the future to prevent future Russian attempts to influence our elections. But also, I think it's been exploited by the mainstream media and by the Democratic Party to try to allege that President Trump is somehow in the bag with the Russians and kind of he's being manipulated by Vladimir Putin. And I think that's just not true. I think there's definitely been some communication between Trump's aides and the Russians, and we need to take a careful look at that and see. And it's definitely a bit unorthodox, but kind of the mainstream media allegations that Trump is somehow a Russian agent are blatantly false, and there's no evidence to back that.
I don't think that you can say that. I think the evidence shows that so many people close to Donald Trump have, at this point, been proven to have had contact with Russian agents. You can't ignore that. I think that we have to follow this investigation to the end, which could be a long way from now, considering there's still not nearly enough information out for us to know exactly what's happened. And if it proves that Trump has in fact had contact with Russia, that's something we need to take very seriously. Russia across the world has been proven to be meddling in elections to try to put in nationalist regimes, and Donald Trump is that for the U.S. And if it, for many people, he's much more. But if it proves that he is in fact being manipulated by the Russian government, not directly, but through these means, that's something we have to take very seriously.
I 100% agree with you, Calvin, in the sense that we need to proceed with this investigation. We need to take a full look. And indeed, if Donald Trump is actually coordinated during the election with the Russians, I definitely would agree that that would be grounds of impeachment. But the evidence so far does not show any of that. And I think we should instead of politicizing this, we should be taking a careful look and be seeing, especially with all these European elections coming up in France, we already had one in the Netherlands, which many people were alleging had some impact. And with kind of Russian threats in the Baltic and in Ukraine, we need to be taking a hard line against Russia. And also, I think the allegations that Trump is kind of unduly coerced by the Russians just aren't true. If you look, we've been 2 months into his administration, and the U.S. foreign policy in regards to Russia hasn't changed a bit. The sanctions are still there, and we've taken actually a harder line against the Russians. So I don't think there's kind of...
Okay, so now last night was also the first full committee since Democratic Representative Adam Schiff called on Nunes to step down from the Russian investigation. However, it was recently announced Schiff and Nunes actually agreed on something, bringing in FBI Director James Comey back to the committee. Do you guys think that this bipartisan move will help move the investigation along, and will Comey even agree to take a stand again?
I think that, yeah, any move towards bipartisanship is important in this. And I certainly hope that James Comey will, take a hard stand against President Trump, or against the attempts to influence the investigation.
Dominic?
I agree with Calvin in the sense that bringing Comey in is a good move, and kind of with both Nunes and Schiff agreeing, that's good. But kind of your comments on being hard against Trump, I don't think that really makes any sense. This is about kind of finding the truth. It's not about discrediting the Trump administration or protecting Trump, which is kind of an allegation that's been hurled at Nunes and which we definitely should be guarding against. It's more about finding what the Russians did in our election and how we can fight back against that.
Well, the latest we've heard the president weigh in on this issue is in a tweet last week where he said his former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, should ask for immunity so he does not have to testify about his alleged conversations with the Russian ambassador. What do you guys make of this comment?
I think it shows that there is something going on. It's proof that there's something very serious happening that we need to investigate it further.
I definitely agree. I don't think we should be granting immunity to Mike Flynn just now. We should be continue to investigate and see what his level of connections with the Russians were. And actually, for example, like the payments he received from Russia at times are definitely a cause for concern. But I think we should be kind of holding back, and the tweet is certainly very concerning.
And getting back to the Eric Prince revelation, as we know, Prince is the brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, someone who donated lots of money to the Trump campaign. Prince was a donor too. There are lots of connections. How big of a deal is this?
I think it's been overblown. I think this was just kind of like routine diplomatic back channel communicating with the Russians. I don't think it's any cause for impeachment or anything illegal in any way. I think it's commonly used method of, maybe you can argue it's imprudent, but I think it's perfectly acceptable.
I mean, I think again it just shows that we need to further investigate and find out if how close this was to Donald Trump, and what was said further in the conversations.
Well, we'll keep you updated as this investigation continues. And coming up, we'll talk climate change, see how the Trump administration is changing Obama-era policies.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
A week ago, President Trump signed a sweeping executive order undoing significant portions of Barack Obama's climate change legacy. The order instructed federal regulations to do away with the rules curbing U.S. carbon emissions. Under the executive order, a temporary ban on coal production would be lifted, and federal officials would no longer have to consider the impact of climate change when making decisions. This is not the first action Trump has taken to undo environmental protections. In the first 2 months of his administration, Trump has removed regulations barring surface mining companies from polluting waterways and set aside a policy that would have forced coal companies to pay more in federal royalties. The administration has also announced lower fuel efficiency standards for cars and approved both the Dakota Access and Keystone XL pipelines, projects Obama halted. While the executive order does not formally remove the U.S. from the Paris Accord, it significantly limits Obama-era actions intended to help the U.S. meet its obligations under the treaty. If the U.S. thwarts its obligations under the agreement, many are wondering if other top polluters like China or India will hold up their end of the bargain. So how will this executive order and other actions by the Trump administration affect the Paris Accord? Why is this administration hesitant to remove itself from the accord?
I think these actions by the Trump administration are a good sign that this administration wants to move forward from the executive overreach in the regards of regulations by the Obama administration, and kind of wants to enact a pro-American energy policy. We've seen it with kind of the approval of Keystone and the Dakota Access pipeline. We need to start producing energy at home, and we need to end this witch hunt against the production of coal and against oil at home. And I think this kind of the impact on the climate is very much overhyped, and I think the Obama administration was unfairly punishing coal companies.
I don't think anyone's arguing that we need to produce our own energy, but we need to find ways to do that do not harm the environment, that help the environment, or preserve the environment. And in fact, that's where the jobs are now. There aren't any jobs in coal. The idea that we're bringing the jobs back to coal is actually a fiction. That's an era of the past. Coal doesn't have jobs. It's all about mountaintop removal at this point. We need to move to things like solar and stuff, and that's where the money will be in the future. And it's a beautiful moment where we can combine our energy interests with our environmental interests, and that's what we need to be following. We have to be hard on the industries that are polluting.
I think in response to that, I think definitely there is a long-term trend in which coal is becoming less and less profitable, and it's kind of the percentage of our energy that comes from coal is decreasing. But I think we should leave it to the market to decide whether we continue to produce coal, like use coal for our energy production or not.
I mean, I think you can say that to a certain extent, but there's commonplace reforms by the Obama administration that Trump's overturning. The idea that they can now pollute streams. I mean, defending our streams should be defending our waterways should be a common sense measure. The idea that we can just do away with that now is nonsense.
Sorry, just to correct that, actually the Trump administration has done nothing in regards to the Clean Water Act. That's still in place. We still have regulations prohibiting companies from polluting our waters. That hasn't disappeared. So I don't get where you're bringing this.
Overturning measures that stop coal companies from polluting into our waterways.
No.
Okay, well, if I can just jump in here. The trend throughout the economy is an overall shift away from fossil fuels and towards more efficient energy sources like solar or wind power. To what extent was this trend manufactured by policymakers, and what extent will this trend be impacted by Trump's executive order?
I think definitely this trend is going to continue. We've seen it with fracking and the impact it's had on the production of natural gas, and we've seen with the growth of wind and solar energy. It's definitely, it's a natural phenomenon that's going to continue on no matter what the Trump administration does. However, who are we going to put in charge of doing this? Are we going to leave it in the hands of a few bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. who are going to pick winners and losers and subsidize companies like Solyndra, whose owners are the friends of these bureaucrats? Or are we going to leave it to the market, to the American people to decide what forms of energy production are the best for them?
The idea that I don't think that you can say that we're picking and choosing winners. We're picking the earth and the people that are living on this earth and protecting them. I don't think that you can. It's to prioritize, business interests that are really only going to the upper class. Our energy sources aren't providing the jobs. Our old energy sources, and so I think that we have to prioritize protecting our environment over, outdated energy sources.
Well, Donald Trump has made it clear throughout his campaign and into his presidency that he will not put environmentally friendly policies before American jobs. He appointed Scott Pruitt, who frequently sued the EPA, as Oklahoma Attorney General to head the EPA. Scott Pruitt also argued incorrectly earlier this month that carbon dioxide is not the leading cause of climate change. Trump himself has called climate change a hoax perpetuated by the Chinese. Given the administration's attitudes and actions on climate change thus far in the administration, what should we expect moving forward?
I think we should expect further energy-friendly policies. We should expect kind of leasing of offshore drilling in the Gulf and probably in Alaska too. I think those are definitely priorities the Trump administration has, and kind of the creation of more jobs.
I think that those statements, the hoax and the lies by Scott Pruitt, show that energy is just not regarded, the environment is not regarded, and we're totally prioritizing energy in a way that isn't even practical moving forward. We need and if regulations are going to move us faster in the direction that we need to preserve our environment and create energy that's sustainable, then by all means, we should put those regulations in place.
And President Trump is scheduled to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago on Thursday to discuss climate issues as well as trade.
Go you Northwestern, go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for sweet victories, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back. We're going to go live now back to Andrew Merica, who has been keeping an eye on the Evanston mayoral election. Andrew, do we have a winner?
Fallon, we do not yet have a winner, but it is very, very close. Kelly and I have actually moved inside now. She's checking very vigorously on the computer. Keep refreshing the page. Right now we have 42 out of 50 precincts reporting, and get this, Haggerty 50.23% to Tendom 49.7%. It is very, very close. We only have 8 more precincts to go. Very close. We're watching this. She's going to jump up and down as soon as we get the results. We do know about the other precinct, which is right over there. Precinct 1 that was here in Parks Hall. They had officially 122 voters, 57 for Haggerty, 64 for Tendom. One actually put in a write-in candidate, but that does not count. So that vote does not count. So really 121 real votes here in Parks Hall. This is all very exciting. Nobody thought, I don't believe that this was going to be this close. As I said earlier, when I was on before, the Haggerty had 44.4% of the vote in the 5-person race. And now it's this close. We'll keep checking, and as soon as we get results, if we get them by the end of the show, hopefully we'll be back on. But this is exciting, Fallon.
Well, we'll keep you updated as the results unfold. Andrew Merica, live in Parks Hall, thanks. We'll have more on the Evanston mayoral election next Tuesday on the Northwestern News Report. And this past Tuesday, in an attempt to inhibit Russian expansion into Europe, the Senate nearly unanimously voted to permit Montenegro to join NATO. The Senate voted 97-2 in favor of Montenegro becoming a member of NATO. The Senate hopes that the addition will prevent Russia from entering the Balkans. The vote comes after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson urged the Senate to initiate Montenegro's membership into the UN because of the capacity to have greater relations between the country's neighbors. Two senators, Rand Paul of Kentucky and Mike Lee of Utah, spoke against the proposal. Paul, in an editorial to the magazine, said that adding Montenegro to NATO is, quote, not in our self-interest, and calls the proposal, quote, Russian-bashing session. First things first, President Trump repeatedly been accused of cozying up to Russia. This vote is in defiance of Putin's anti-NATO stance. Do you think that the president will approve this?
I think definitely the Trump administration has been strong and been firm in regards to this issue. Secretary Tillerson did a good job in kind of corralling Senate support in favor of this treaty and kind of shepherding through the Senate. And I think President Trump is definitely going to sign this into law.
Yeah, I think it seems like it's moving forward, and I think that's a good thing for.
Great. So it seems like Congress's intention with admitting Montenegro to NATO is to deter Russian aggression, especially in the Balkans, an area that Russia has historically claimed is under their protection, one of the factors that led the world to World War I. Do you believe that this development will be an effective deterrent?
I definitely believe that this kind of accepting Montenegro into NATO is a good idea and will deter Russian expansion to the Balkans. Montenegro has a strategic location into the Adriatic, and definitely that's a really important thing, and we should be doing all we can in order to strengthen NATO and kind of stand firm against Russian aggression.
Yeah, I agree that we should strengthen NATO. I'm interested to know what do you think of that, considering President Trump's disapproval of NATO throughout the campaign.
Yeah, I think his distrust of NATO was misplaced. I think definitely NATO nations need to increase their military spending. That's something we need to work to achieve. But strengthening NATO is in our best interest because we need to have kind of a strong body of nations willing to stand up to Putin in Europe.
So Senator Rand Paul raised concerns that Montenegro's entrance into NATO will just suck up more funds from the U.S. Is this senator justified at all?
I think that in the past, it's definitely been a fact that we've spent an oversized amount of funds on kind of backing up NATO. But I think Secretary Tillerson has been talking about this, and Vice President Pence talked about this in his speech at NATO. Kind of we're trying to incentivize European nations to spend more on kind of defense spending and backing up NATO. So I don't think that's going to be an issue going forward.
Yeah, I think it's not going to change that much. Montenegro is a small country, and we're not gonna. They probably aren't going to add that much, but I don't think they're going to end up costing the rest of NATO that much either.
So Montenegro's membership is still subject to Donald Trump's approval, along with parliamentary consent from the Netherlands and Spain. And now the final word. The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of Northwestern University or NNN. They are the views of Politicat's editorial staff. The case is closed. Northwestern University is taking no disciplinary action against Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity and the unnamed fraternity accused of sexual assault and drugging women this February. In an email statement, Patricia Tejas Irving, Vice President for Student Affairs, said, quote, "After gathering and assessing all additional information and carefully considering the wishes of those who spoke, the SHPO staff, and the applicable Title IX guidance, the university has concluded its review related to the alleged sexual misconduct. No disciplinary action or further investigative action related to the reports of sexual misconduct will be taken at this time." Following the reported allegations in February, many NU students jumped to action, organizing marches and rallies to raise awareness for sexual assault. These same students are now outraged by the university's lack of action. Back in January 2014, Northwestern updated and expanded its sexual misconduct policy, stating that sexual violence is not acceptable, but this lack of action says otherwise. Following the update from Northwestern, the University of Pennsylvania student newspaper, the Daily Pennsylvanian, responded saying UPenn would take a different route. Director of Sexual Violence Prevention Jessica Mertz said if Penn were placed in a similar situation, she would focus on engaging students in conversation about the incident and prevention. But isn't that what Northwestern students tried to do? They spoke out, marching on Sheridan Road from the fraternity quad to Sigma Alpha Epsilon's headquarters. Yet this remains an issue. And this isn't just a Northwestern issue. This is a nationwide community problem, coast to coast, from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, all the way to the University of California, Berkeley. To cap this problem, some schools like Dartmouth are mandating sexual assault prevention education courses for all 4 years. But we can do better. And as students at these schools, we must do better. We must work to create environments where survivors are protected, justice is served, and sexual assault becomes an issue of the past. Well, that's our show for tonight. Thank you to our guests, Calvin Anderson of the College Democrats and Dominic Bayer of College Republicans. I'm Fallon Gallagher, and you've been watching Politicat.